The death train. No way off. No way out. You step onto the train. The doors slide shut. The lights flicker. Something feels wrong. The passengers sit unnaturally still, their faces hidden in shadow. At the next stop, one of them disappears. No sound, no movement, just gone. Stop after stop, more vanish. No one gets on. No one gets off. The train never empties, but soon you're the only one left. Then the intercom crackles. A voice, distorted, inhuman. Final stop. You. Do you dare find out what happens next? The year is 2379. The deep space exploration vessel, USCSS Nightfall, drifts through the silent abyss of Sector 17A. For weeks, the crew has been on a routine mission, surveying uncharted regions, cataloging distant anomalies. Then, the signal came. A distress beacon. Weak, fragmented, but unmistakably real. Captain Kara Holloway leans over the central console, her sharp green eyes scanning the data flickering across the screen. The message is garbled, distorted by cosmic radiation and distance, but the identification code is clear. Erebus 9. The name sends a chill through the bridge. Kara doesn't speak immediately. She knows the story. Erebus 9 disappeared over a century ago, presumed lost with all hands. The official report? A failed expedition. No survivors. But no wreckage was ever found. No transmission ever recovered. Until now. Kara exhales slowly, then turns to her crew. "Bring us in," she orders. The ship hums as its thrusters fire, redirecting toward the source of the signal. Approaching the lost vessel. The closer they get, the more unsettling the readings become. Erebus 9 is adrift. Abandoned and silent. Its exterior is scarred, deep claw-like gashes torn through its reinforced hull. The vessel is intact, but it looks wrong. As if something unnatural has been festering inside it for far too long. Lieutenant Rookvance, the ship's engineer, leans toward the screen. "That thing looks like it's been through hell." Dr. Alara Thorne, the ship's medical officer, frowns. "If it's been floating for over 100 years, how is the distress beacon still active?" Kara doesn't have an answer. Docking with the unknown. A cold, mechanical hiss fills the air as Nightfall's docking clamps engage. The two ships lock together, forming an air-sealed passage. The lights in the docking bay flicker, an omen of something gone terribly wrong. "Suit up," Kara orders. Full biohazard gear. No exceptions. The team assembles: Kara, Rook, Alara, and Corporal Miles Carter, their security officer. As they cycle through the airlock, an eerie silence presses down on them. Then, the doors slide open. The smell hits them first. Not just the stale, recycled air of a long-dead vessel. Something else. Something rotten. A stench that clings to the inside of their helmets. Their flashlights pierce through the darkness of Erebus 9's interior. The walls are covered in something organic. Pulsating veins of blackened tissue snake along the metal plating. Dried blood splatters mark the floor, frozen in time. Alara shudders. This isn't just a lost ship. Something happened here. Kara steps forward, trying to ignore the feeling that something is watching them. "Let's find that signal and get the hell out of here." The last transmission. The bridge is in ruins. Broken consoles, shattered glass, a decayed corpse strapped to the captain's chair, its flesh dried and stretched over bone like a grotesque sculpture. Then, Rook finds it. A data terminal, still active, its screen flickering with a final recorded message. He patches it through to their comms, and the room fills with a static-laced voice. "We made a mistake. Oh, God. We thought it was dead. Don't open the door. It isn't locked in here with us. We're locked in with it." The audio cuts to screaming, then silence. A faint scratching sound echoes from deeper within the ship. Miles grips his weapon tighter. "Did you hear that?" Kara turns sharply. The shadows shift along the far corridor. Something moved. The sound comes again. Closer. Louder. Like nails against metal. They are not alone. The silence was unbearable. Captain Kara Holloway tightened her grip on her weapon, her breathing slow. Controlled, but inside, she felt it. That primal, bone-deep sensation. Something was watching them. The scratching sound had stopped. The four of them stood frozen on the bridge of Erebus 9. The dim emergency lights casting flickering shadows across the room. "We should go," Alara whispered, voice barely audible over the faint hum of the dying ship. "Not yet." Kara gestured toward the console where the final transmission still flickered. That signal didn't send itself. Something kept this ship alive for over a century. Miles adjusted his rifle, eyes locked on the corridor ahead. And whatever did, that is still here. A deep, rhythmic thudding sound suddenly echoed through the ship. Far away, then closer. Something was waking up. Signs of the impossible. They moved carefully through the corridors, flashlights sweeping the darkness. The walls were covered in thick, black veins. Organic growth twisting through the metallic infrastructure. It pulsed like it was breathing. Rook tapped at his scanner. This isn't just decay. It's alive. Alara examined the fleshy mass coating the ceiling, her voice unsteady. This isn't human biology. She hesitated, struggling to find the right word. It's evolving. A metallic screech cut through the silence. They spun toward the sound. Deeper in the ship, something heavy moved. The distant thudding was now pounding, coming from the lower decks. Something large. Something awake. We need to go now, Miles hissed, raising his rifle. Kara clenched her jaw. They needed answers. But she knew when a mission had changed from reconnaissance to survival. Back to the airlock. They turned, quickening their pace. Then the ship shifted. The walls trembled. The air thickened. And then the lights failed. Trapped in the dark. Total darkness. Kara's heart pounded as she gritted her teeth. Rook, give me something. His scanner beeped erratically, glitching. Jesus, it's everywhere. The heat signatures are. The lights flickered back on. For a split second, Kara saw them. Figures. Bodies. Crawling from the walls, the ceiling, the vents. Twisted. Skeletal things with elongated fingers and hollow, hungry faces. Then, darkness again. Miles fired. His rifle flashed, lighting up the corridor in bursts. Shadows jerked and convulsed, flinching away from the bursts of energy. Move. Go. Kara roared. The team ran. Behind them, the corridor came alive. Metallic shrieks, the scuttling of countless limbs, the grotesque. What sound of something crawling through the ship? A scream, Alara's. Kara spun, saw something grab Alara's leg, a skeletal hand with too many joints, too many fingers. It pulled. Kara lunged, firing. The thing recoiled, screeching. She grabbed Alara and hauled her up. Go. Go. They sprinted through the decaying corridors, the airlock just ahead. Then, a deafening, bone-rattling roar. The ship shuddered violently, and something massive began to emerge from the darkness behind them. The airlock was in sight. Kara could feel the blood pounding in her ears. Her breath ragged from the sprint. Behind them, the ship howled, a deep, unnatural wail that vibrated through the metal, through their bones. Miles skidded to a stop by the airlock controls. Hands flying over the keypad. Come on, eh. The doors didn't budge. A system override. Kara's stomach twisted. Something didn't want them to leave. Behind them, the darkness moved. Rook turned. Rifle raised. It's coming. Then the lights flickered, and they saw it. The thing in the dark. It crawled from the corridor, pulling itself forward with elongated limbs. Its skin was stretched too tight over jagged bones, its ribcage visible beneath a layer of sickly, pulsating flesh. But the worst part, its face. It was almost human. The remnants of a mouth twitched. Empty eye sockets locked onto them. Black pits where something still writhed inside. It spoke. A whisper of dozens of voices layered over each other, speaking in a language that should not exist. Miles raised his weapon. Stay back. The creature tilted its head, smiled. Then it rushed them. Desperate measures. Gunfire erupted. Energy blasts ripped into the creature, but it barely flinched. Its body shuddered, absorbing the impacts, flesh knitting itself back together as fast as they could tear it apart. It couldn't be killed. Not like this. Alara grabbed Kara's arm. The manual override. We can force the airlock from engineering. Kara didn't hesitate. Move. They turned and ran, abandoning the airlock as the creature's clawed hands scraped the walls. Moving after them in a sick, unnatural motion, like it had learned how to move by studying corpses. The corridor twisted into a maze of decay. The ship was changing. Walls pulsated. The floor had become fleshy, shifting beneath their boots. And then, the worst realization. They weren't running through a ship anymore. They were inside something alive. The hive. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. A cathedral of horror. The walls were lined with bodies. Some human, some not. Suspended in the flesh, half consumed. their eyes still moving, still aware. Kara stepped forward, horrified. "They're still alive." A whisper echoed through the chamber. "Not alive." The voice was everywhere. Miles whirled, scanning the shadows. "Where the hell is that coming from?" Rook pointed. Up. At the ceiling, something massive stirred. A colossal shape, limbs entwined with the ship's structure. A mind made of stolen bodies. It had been waiting, and now it was awake. The hive mind stirred. It was watching them, not with eyes, but with something deeper, an intelligence that stretched across every twisted body fused to the walls, every whispering voice in the dark. The thing wasn't just alive. It was thinking, and it had plans for them. The voice in the dark. The ceiling shifted, a mass of writhing flesh, veins pulsing, the twisted remnants of bones and bodies interwoven like a grotesque web. The whispers grew louder. Then a voice. No single source, no mouth. The sound was all around them, an echo from every half-conscious, half-digested body in the walls. "You hear us." Kara froze. Alara screamed, clutching her head. Miles fell to his knees, his nose bleeding. It wasn't just a voice. It was inside their minds. Kara clenched her teeth, forcing herself to speak. "What the hell are you?" A pause. Then a sickening wave of amusement. "We are." The voices twisted, merging, separating again. "We were before you. We will be after you. You do not belong here." Rook stepped forward, weapon raised. "Neither do you." Silence. Then a slow, creaking sound as the walls shifted. The bodies and the flesh began to move. Consumed. Kara watched in horror as the trapped bodies twitched. One by one, they turned their half-melted faces toward her. Their mouths opened, and they began to scream. Not in pain, in warning. Rook fired first, a blast of plasma tearing into the nearest figure. It barely reacted. The bodies detached from the walls, dropping to the floor in twitching spasms, before standing. Their joints moving at impossible angles. Miles pulled Alara to her feet. "Run!" They bolted. The chase. The corridor came alive around them. Flesh rippled beneath their boots. Pipes twisted into grasping tendrils. The ship was eating itself and taking them with it. They sprinted past once dead crew members, now reanimated, their eyes hollow. Their mouths whispering in sync with the hive. The voice laughed inside Kara's head. "You are already part of us." She ignored it. They turned a corner, a blast door ahead. Engineering. Their only chance. But as they reached the door, it slammed shut, sealing them inside the nightmare. And behind them, the hive came crawling. The door slammed shut with a deafening clang, sealing them inside. Kara spun around, panting, her pulse pounding in her ears. Behind them, the corridor pulsed, alive, the grotesque figures crawling, twisting, pulling themselves forward with inhuman motions. The walls breathed, veins pulsing beneath the metal, as if the ship itself was a living thing. And the voice, the whispering, creeping, invasive voice coiled around their minds. "We told you. You do not belong here." Engineering wasn't empty. Miles pounded on the control panel. Come on. Let me override this damn thing." But Kara wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at the bodies. They weren't alone. Scattered across the engineering bay were remnants of the previous crew. Some still strapped into their workstations, their bodies half-melted into the chairs, their eyes staring blankly into nothingness. Others, still moving. One of them twitched, its head jerking toward her, and then it stood up. The assimilated crew. Alara screamed. The reanimated engineers turned in unison. Their movements were unnatural, delayed, like puppets on invisible strings. Their mouths opened, but it wasn't air they sucked in. It was whispers. They spoke in unison, their voices layered, fractured, wrong. This was our home. Now it is something more. Now it is us. Rook raised his rifle and fired. A plasma bolt hit the nearest figure square in the chest, but instead of collapsing, the flesh absorbed the impact. Shifting, reforming. The engineer looked down at the hole in its torso. Then it smiled. The hole sealed itself. Miles froze. "Oh, hell no." Then they charged. Nowhere to run. Kara ducked as one lunged at her, its elongated fingers stretching unnaturally, nearly raking across her face. Alara grabbed a wrench, swinging wildly. The impact snapped one of the creature's arms backward, but it didn't even flinch. Rook was firing continuously, but it was doing nothing. The bodies just kept reforming. The wounds sealing almost instantly. "Nothing's working," Alara cried. Miles was still at the control panel, sweating, swearing, frantically overriding system locks. The creatures kept coming. They weren't trying to kill them. They were trying to pull them in. Kara could feel it. The pull, the whispering voices, the way the creatures moved like a single being. This wasn't just a hive. It was a parasite. A conscious, consuming thing that didn't just infect, it became. The truth. And then she saw it. The core. Past the engineers, near the central reactor, was something else. A mass of shifting, writhing tissue, its tendrils woven deep into the ship's systems, feeding off the energy, pulsating with sickly green light. It wasn't just the crew. The entire ship had been infected. And the worst part? It was growing. Rook followed her gaze. Shit. It's in the reactor. Kara's stomach dropped. If it was feeding on the reactor, then it wasn't just consuming them. It was evolving. Miles suddenly yelled. The override worked. The emergency systems kicked in, flooding the room with red warning lights. The engineering doors unlocked. Their way out was open, but the infected felt it too. They screeched in unison, and they rushed them. Kara didn't hesitate. Run. The emergency sirens wailed through the engineering bay, casting the room in a strobe of flickering red light. The infected crew twitched, then turned, their hollow eyes locking onto the open door. Then they moved. Not with hesitation, not with thought. They lunged. No time to think. Kara was already running. She could hear Alara gasping behind her. The sound of boots slamming against the metal floor, the sharp hum of Rook's plasma rifle firing shot after useless shot. But nothing stopped them. One of the creatures grabbed Miles' shoulder. Its fingers dug into his suit, the tips beginning to merge, fuse with the fabric. Kara spun, slashing with her blade. The fingers snapped apart, but black tendrils still clung to his skin, writhing. Miles screamed, shoving away before the infection could take hold. They couldn't be touched, not even once. Through the hallways, the team burst into the corridor, the door hissing closed behind them. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, bang, the first impact, then another, then another. The metal buckled outward, denting as the things pounded from the other side. Rook skidded to a stop. That door's not going to hold. Miles was already pulling up his holopad. We're close to the airlock. If we can get to the emergency shuttle. Crash. A metal panel burst open. And they came through the walls. Hands, limbs, twisted skeletal things, pulling themselves through the ducts, the ceiling, the ventilation grates. They had never been safe. The descent. Go. Kara shoved Alara forward, leading them into the next hallway. The emergency lights flickered violently, and for the first time, Kara realized the power wasn't just failing. It was being drained. The ship's systems weren't just malfunctioning. They were being devoured. Miles swore. It's adapting to our movements. It knows where we're going. Kara barely had time to process before a shadow lunged from the ceiling. A twisted form dropped onto Rook, claws sinking into his back. He roared in pain, falling to his knees. Kara grabbed for him, pulling hard. But the infection spread in an instant. The veins bulged, black lines crawling up his neck like worms beneath his skin. He turned to look at her, and his eyes, they weren't his anymore. Kara let go and ran. Final door. The airlock was ahead. Miles sprinted ahead, overriding the locks. The blast doors hissed, slowly opening. But Alara froze. Kara, Rook's still back there. He's gone, Alara. A scream pierced the corridor. The infected were closing in. Their faces merged, twisted into a single monstrous thing, whispering as one. Stay? Stay. Stay. Kara grabbed Alara's arm and yanked her inside. The doors slammed shut behind them. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the whispering continued. But now, it was inside their heads. The unthinkable choice. The emergency shuttle was still intact. Kara moved first, strapping into the controls, barely hearing Miles fumbling with the launch sequence. Then Alara spoke. What if we're already infected? The words hung in the air. Kara gripped the throttle tighter. No one spoke. Because the truth was they didn't know. Escape or something worse. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The airlock shook violently. The whispering grew louder. The ship's kerpulsed, a grotesque living thing now fully awake. 7, 6. Kara's heartbeat pounded. She looked at Alara. She looked at Miles. And she wondered, did they really escape? Or had something already made its way inside? 5, 4, 3. They were out of time. The ship was dying. The emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows against the blood-smeared walls. The distant screams had stopped. Only silence remained, except for the deep, guttural breathing coming from somewhere in the dark. Elias staggered forward, gripping his wounded side. His vision swam, but he forced himself to focus. He had made it to the command center. If he could send one final transmission, maybe someone, anyone, would know what happened here. He slammed his hand onto the control panel, leaving a crimson print on the cracked surface. The terminal screen flickered to life, barely holding together after the system's catastrophic failures. The ship's distress beacon was already active, but that wouldn't be enough. He needed to send a warning. His fingers trembled over the keys as he began typing. This is Lieutenant Elias Voss of the USC Prospero. If anyone receives this message, do not approach. This ship is no longer ours. It belongs to something else. Something old. Something waiting. A wet, slithering sound echoed through the vents above him. They were close. Elias swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. His breathing was ragged. His head pounded from blood loss. It wasn't an outbreak. It wasn't sabotage. We brought them back. We thought they were dead. They weren't. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing back the memory of Dr. Halstead. Standing over one of the recovered artifacts, his hands shaking with excitement. They're fossilized, he had said. Just remains of an extinct species. They weren't. They had waited. Elias' breath hitched as the terminal's flickering light revealed movement just outside the shattered glass doors of the command center. They had found him, a mass of elongated limbs and hollow, chittering breaths pressed against the doorway. Their eyeless faces tilted, sniffing the air. Their skeletal fingers dragged across the metal, leaving streaks of dark fluid behind. Not much time. Elias forced his hands back to the terminal. They're inside me. I don't know how long I have. I hear them in my head, whispering, changing me. Pain lanced through his skull. His veins burned, pulsating beneath his skin. He knew what was coming. A rasping voice spoke from his own throat, but it wasn't his anymore. Join us. Elias' fingers clenched into a fist, fighting against the thing that was already taking over. He could feel his body rebelling, becoming something else. They don't kill, he typed desperately. They change you. If you come here, if you hear this, stay away. The creatures at the door stopped scratching. They understood. Elias felt his arms go slack. His breathing slowed. His vision darkened. As the creatures stepped inside, their hollow mouths stretching open in unnatural grins, he forced himself to hit send. The last transmission of the Prospero went out into the void. No one would come, and the ship drifted onward, waiting for the next to arrive. End.